Hello. Good evening. Great. Welcome to Matter for our next installment of Tales from the Trenches. My name is Stephen Collins. I'm the CEO of Matter. For those of you who haven't spent a lot of time here, we are a healthcare technology incubator and innovation hub. We opened just shy of 2 years ago, really with a mission to speed the development of solutions in healthcare that really solve meaningful problems and that will solve those in the right ways. We work with about 150 startup companies and about 70 partners. And one of the things that we really like to do is facilitate conversations around meaningful topics in healthcare and conversations with really interesting people in healthcare. And so that's what this series is all about. We bring in entrepreneurs who have built really interesting companies, had a lot of different kinds of experiences, and then are willing to share those experiences with the community, the ups and downs and the stories of how they built their businesses through the process and what they're doing now in healthcare. So we produce this series with two partners. One is a company called Outcome Health. How many people have heard of Outcome Health? Outcome Health, formerly known as ContextMedia, one just changed their name, I think officially last week. Really recognizing, I don't know if you want to go in, fine, I'll tell the story, and if it's wrong, then so be it. So they started the company when Rishi, who's the founder and the CEO, and his business partner Shraddha were undergrads in school, and they were really fascinated by media, and so putting media in the right place to allow patients to make better decisions at the point of care, and so there was really a media focus as the company's evolved over the last eight years. Has really focused on driving outcomes and improving outcomes with a suite of products that are now in 55,000 doctors' offices around the country. Did you do a pretty good job? Okay. So very impressive company that we've been really happy to work with for the last couple of years as we've been building Matter. And the second folks who we partner with are Pritzker Venture Capital. It's a multi-stage venture firm based here in Chicago, really the largest venture firm in the Midwest, and with a large and continuing to grow focus on health IT deals. Adam Coopersmith, his partner, leads the healthcare focus here. So anybody who wants capital, just talk to Adam afterwards. And talk to Mark as well, which we'll hear a lot about. So tonight we have a guest from Madison, who's going to talk about having built probably the premier Epic implementation firm, is now a venture capitalist. So you can also talk to Mark afterwards if you're looking for money. So with that, let's give Mark and Rishi. Sorry. I'm going to get in trouble. If you want to ask a question, we use a online platform. You go to matter.socialqa.com. For those of you watching the live stream, works just as well from wherever you are. Rishi will have an iPad, and we'll be able to sort through the questions. If you want to join the conversation on Twitter, the hashtag is hashtag Tales from the Trenches. Now, thanks very much, and give Mark and Rishi, please, a warm welcome.
So welcome, everybody, as we kick off a new year. And I am really excited for tonight because I get the pleasure of interviewing my good friend, Mark Bakken, who's a couple of things. He's an entrepreneur's entrepreneur. So he's just got this heart that you'll see tonight to start things and create things and take risk and have courage through it. that's really, really incredible. It's inspired me when I heard his story. I want to make sure we get him to share it with you all. But then two, actually, I scheduled a meeting with Jason right after. And the reason I did that is because he's also a venture capitalist. And he's got some companies he's funded with his firm here at Matter. So there's no line to talk with me tonight. Mark's going to get just jammed. He's not going to get out of here until midnight. So he's writing checks. He brought a checkbook in the Q&A. But no, so look, Mark, you've got just such a great story. So many companies. I just heard about some new ones I didn't even know about. But I know. Look, you reflect on your childhood. It was important to you, and I like to start there. I'm known for the "What were you like as a kid?" question. So I'll ask you that, and also I know you had a moment when you were kind of in the 7th, 8th grade, and you kind of knew what you wanted a big part of your life to be about. So tell us about where you grew up, how you grew up, and also just that introduction to technology early on.
Happy to. So first of all, thanks for having me. I feel very honored. So with that, I've born and raised in Wisconsin, been there my entire life. So came from a family where 6 kids. My dad had his own business, so that was a piece of the entrepreneur thing. He was a landscaper. It never really amounted into much more than when the 6 kids were working for him as slaves, basically. So I knew I didn't want to do manual
Which is an entrepreneurship strategy, by the way. Have kids, so make them work.
It did work for him for a while. We didn't get paid very often. But anyways, learned a lot along the way. Watched and observed and said, if I ever had a business, I don't know if I would do that. I'd probably do this, and everything else. But my mom was a nursing instructor, so she was kind of more the stability and benefits and everything else. My dad was more like, okay, free spirit type thing. So anyways, in 7th grade, when I was 14, back a long time ago now, 1978, my dad brought home a computer. It was a Texas Instruments 99 4A. Still remember it. And he went to all of us and said, hey, I've got this thing. I would like one of you to figure it out, basically, because he was too old, I guess, or something. And I was like, oh, this is kind of interesting. Open it up, and he wanted to set up a general ledger. And that basically started my entire path towards technology and working with technology. I really got into it. I ended up writing my first program back then, which was like at the time, there was an arcade game, and you all know it today, probably Frogger. So I was like, I think I could recreate this. And it seems crazy today that, there's so many programming languages, and the computers get faster and faster, but it still seems like slow. And back then, it was like 32K, and you could do everything. So I'm not quite sure what happened along the way. But anyways, that was kind of the moment that I really knew I wanted to kind of do something with technology. And thankfully, that's right when Apple was starting to put the Macs in high school, and the IBM PC came out. And in high school, I gravitated towards our computer programming, and then that led to.
You ended up doing computer science at UW, right? And then
I did, yeah.
Did it after. What was it like back then to be around that field? You hear about it so much now. Back then, I'm sure were you explaining to your friends what it is that you're going to go do and what computers are going to do, and what was that like?
So back then, it was more viewed as like a toy, basically, and but everyone was starting to say, hey, these PCs might be able to save us a lot of money. They've been using IBM mainframes. They've been using proprietary closed systems that you couldn't interoperate with, and might sound familiar to some people in healthcare, but the PC, opened up all of that, where people could then develop on top of it, could develop apps, could do lots of things. And for me, it just drew me in because it wasn't straightforward. Networks weren't even there. It was just kind of standalone, and you do the sneaker net, it was called, basically. You put in the floppy and bring it to the other one and bring it to the other one. And eventually it became a network, and then had to figure out all that stuff. So kind of rode that whole wave, when Novell was kind of king, and there were other technologies back then. Sure. And eventually Microsoft, and then Linux, and now a bunch of the others.
Now, we're excited to get to Nordic, one of the most interesting companies that's been built in the healthcare ecosystem really ever with Epic and all the things you guys did. But I want to talk about some of the companies you started before that, because I know they were really formative experiences for you. So take us back. Here you are, 27. You're starting a company. Tell us about that and the whole journey and the company you started right after that as well.
Sure. So my first company was called Goliath Networks. I started it in 1993, and it started more from a fluke. When I graduated from the University of Wisconsin with a computer science degree, they offered me a job at the university, and I was more like a consultant working with all the departments on campus and helping them figure out how to connect to the mainframe, to the internet. And then I got approached by a friend who had just been recently downsized from IBM, and now he was the CIO at a company, and said, would you be interested in being a consultant? We could pay you $60 an hour. We could guarantee 1,000 hours, and we need you to come, implement Novell. We're going to kind of get off the mainframe and put this in. So I kind of did the math and was like, okay, 1,000 hours, it's $60 an hour. I think that's $60,000, and I'm making $28,000 a year at the state, and that's like 2,000 hours. So at the time, I figured, okay, let's take a risk here. I didn't come from money. I didn't know there was investors, and I said, I'll just try this, like a lot of people, just doing some consulting on the side. Thankfully, the timing was great. All of a sudden, more and more people needed help. There weren't a lot of people that understood Novell at the time or Microsoft at the time, and that's when the company really started. They quickly said, hey, do you know anybody else? And thankfully, I knew a lot of people at the university that wanted to make more money and wanted to work for a private company. That's how the first company started.
Tell us what that was like. It became an Inc. 100 company. You're young. You're just, that's not easy, as we all know, as we've all found out. So tell us about, a couple of the tales from the trenches back then and how you overcame them, and ultimately some of the challenges that you ran into approaching the dot-com bust.
Yeah. So as we grew, as most of you know, you might have all this demand, but you still have to make payroll. You still have to wait for the checks to come in. You have to play this game where you're like hoping the checks actually come in time to make payroll in time. If not, you might have to drive out to the customer and say, hey, is there any chance you could cut the check today? Not that we're struggling or anything, but so you really work on your sales skills over time. And
just happened to be in the neighborhood.
Yeah, basically.
Make it easier. Right?
And then you go to the bank and say, hey, can we get a line of credit? And like, well, you have no assets, or like, we just need a $250,000 line of credit. We have all these receivables, and they'll be like, we'll give you a $250,000 line of credit if you can give me $250,000 I can hold as collateral. I'm like, did you just even hear what you just said? That makes zero sense. So dealt with lots of banks.
By the way, we should start doing a question that tells about banker stories.
Oh, I've got it.
I was reading, Phil Knight's book, right? I don't know if you've read it, Shoe Dog. Anybody read Shoe Dog in here? Phil Knight's story. And his banker. I mean, I've always wanted to do this, but people have gotten in the way. I'm like, one day I'm going to write a book, and you're going to be a chapter. and he actually did it. I mean, he names his banker. And he's like, I went in, and he didn't get it. And here's the guy's name, and he worked at this bank. And there was this year. But between all the stories, it's incredible, right? Because, you're so different from who they're banking. And there wasn't venture capital as much, right? And that,
nothing to repossess. There's no inventory. Right. You just have a brand. You have customers. You have... And, commercial lending has not kept up with America. Back then, way back when, when those laws were in place, we were 80% manufacturing economy. Today, we're 20% manufacturing.
Right.
Mostly services. So, anyways, that
sounds like you were successful, though. You got the bank to come in, and
you did eventually, but it kind of limits your growth, and you might miss your window of opportunity. You have all this growth. So, anyways, all that backstory really helped with my third company, Nordic, which my whole goal was that I'm not ever working with a banker, basically. And thankfully, I didn't have to. I found a way to fund the growth. And I didn't even need investors. I ended up using factoring, which is usually used by companies that are on their last breath and trying to just survive or get investors in, or high-growth companies. But it ends up being very expensive money. But for us, it was exactly the right type of funding vehicle to fuel our growth, so we could just keep up with demand like that and grow exponentially. Right. So if I hadn't gone through that with the first two companies, I never, ever would have looked at that as an option for the third company, which was really key, one of the keys for our success in Nordic and growing it from nothing to almost $200 million in revenue today.
That's right. Okay, so you have the first company, you kind of stabilize it, you tell us, you sell it off a little bit, you do a second company, maybe similar experience in some ways, different in others. Set the scene, for where you were, in your head and in just physically in life when you had the idea for Nordic. When the first idea started to come around, how did that happen, and what did you do right after it? Did you start the company right away, or did you kind of think about it for a little while?
No, it basically took about a year where you kind of are thinking about it, you're bouncing it off of friends, saying, hey, if I was going to start another company, I was thinking of this. What do you think, basically? And after my first 2 businesses, the first one I ended up selling right after the Y2K downturn and had all my upside in stock options that ended up being worthless. So I'm kind of starting over with company 2. And then company 2, I'm working closely with Microsoft. And we're doing the red line contract thing back and forth. It's going to change everything. And all of a sudden, our executive sponsor gets fired and changes everything. And now we're starting all over again. So.
And by the way, let's maybe even go into that, because this has happened to so many entrepreneurs where you're counting on that. You might be forecasting it 100%. All of a sudden, something so unforeseen happens, and you're counting on it. It's a big, what do you do that day when you got that news? Did you tell your team? Did you just go home and sleep and not tell anybody? How did you process that? And tell me, a couple of those tales from those trenches and the advice you might have for people who are in the room or watching, who are going through things like that and trying to figure out how to process it, how to react, and make the right decisions.
Yeah, so just to back up a little, the second company was managed services. We were doing about $5 million a year in revenue. Microsoft was going to do a $6.5 million contract for us. It was someone I'd worked with for 7 years on the advisory council. So I had 100% faith. They're like, yep, we're just waiting for the next fiscal year, July 1 to start. We'll finalize it. We'll get you guys going. We'll prepay you a little bit because I know you're going to have costs up front. So I had 100% faith that this was going to happen because I trusted this person, worked with them. I never expected they were going to be let go, and it kind of caught us off guard because of that. And also, this is 2008.
Yeah.
Not a good time to be betting ahead. I mean, we had to invest in a bunch of things ahead of time. I had refinanced my house and put more stuff on credit cards and borrowed from family. And all of a sudden, I'm like, oh my gosh, we're not even going to get this. What are we going to do? Because we need to survive and everything else. So I gathered the whole team up, shared with them, talked to them. We met with our banker at the time and kind of shared the story. You have to just be full disclosure here. And met with some of our customers and talked to them. And thankfully, we found a way to sell off part of our business to help kind of live another day, basically. And unfortunately, as that was happening, it just quickly was becoming more competition was coming in. We weren't big enough. It was kind of a race to the bottom. Ended up selling that more of it as like an acqui-hire type thing, just because we just never were going to recover from that time. So it was at a point where you're like, geez, okay, be careful when you work with large software companies. So my third company worked closely with Epic, and because of that previous experience, I learned a lot about how to work with large software companies, and you have to be careful, and you have to be smart, and you have to be careful what you say on video, and all those things. So,
what that means is Q&A off video is going to be really good. No, so Mark, look, many entrepreneurs have had tough moments like that, and we can all imagine what that's like after that second company. And by that point, you've got a family, and we've talked about this a little bit. How did you process that? I'm trying to think, of any of us, first company, second company, boy, a lot of people have a different response than going and starting Nordic and having the big success you had. So how did you find the resilience, find the courage and strength, and what led you to that?
So for me, I just knew that I believed I had done everything right. I tried to take the high road. I played by the rules. And business is tough, as most of you know out there. It's about negotiating and leverage and all these other things. And I knew that if I would do it one more time, I thought I could figure out the right recipe between aligning everyone's incentives. And I think that was key for the third company. So, as I would reflectively look back, I think most people try to point fingers or this or that or whatever. And a lot of it was just, I didn't know what I was doing. The first time I kind of jumped into it, I didn't really understand the numbers as well as I should have. I didn't quite think through, worst case scenario types. You're an entrepreneur, you're always thinking very, very optimistically. Probably hired earlier than I should have, because you can be convinced by a lot of people when you're an entrepreneur, like, hey, this friend of mine would be really good to head up sales. And at the time, I'm a huge advocate of just saying, hey, as the founder, you're the person that knows this company and the value prop better than anybody, and you should be out there driving sales, or one of the founders should be, until you get to a point where either you've secured enough funding because you've proven that your model's working, or you have your destiny in your own hands. Like at Nordic, I just wanted to make sure we never had to rely on anybody going forward. And probably similar to the way you run your company, And there's a way to do that, and there's a way to have a conversation with your employees to say, hey, you all want to work for a well-run company, and that means a company that actually is making money, and this is why it's good for you, and this is why it's good for the company, and this is why it's good for the customers and everything else like that. So thought a lot more about how I would do things differently if I was going to do it again. And thankfully, my experience as a consulting company for a big software company made a lot of sense now that I live in Madison, Wisconsin, and the biggest, EHR company is right there in my backyard. So when I was doing Microsoft Novell, I'd meet a lot of people, and they'd be like, where's Wisconsin? I'd be like, north of Chicago, somewhere up there, It's not quite Canada, but it's like somewhere in between there. So thankfully with healthcare, everybody knows where Wisconsin is and Madison is because of Epic. So I felt like there had to be a huge untapped market of consulting out there. I knew from Microsoft days and 7 years on Microsoft's advisory council that customers would spend $7 on consulting for every dollar they spend on Microsoft software. So I figured it had to be similar with Epic, and I figured that I knew that Epic had a high turnover rate. They hire some of the best and brightest people from around the country. They make them all move to Madison. And it's a beautiful campus. It's a great place to work, and they really help you, just learn the healthcare industry and how technology can advance the healthcare industry. But eventually, I knew that people would want to either live somewhere else or go back to where they grew up because they're going to settle down, or whatever. They didn't have career opportunities, or they had higher aspirations and everything else. So for me, it made it really easy to say, hey, if you decide to leave, come talk to us. We can't hire you until you're 1 year non-compete, play by all the rules that Epic had, and we'll bill you out, and we'll be your agent, basically, and we'll give you as much as we can of the bill rate, and you can, use your skills to further advance, the healthcare industry. So physically being in Madison gave us a huge, huge competitive advantage for both talent and access to customers. So Epic would make, and Epic still does, has all their customers come to Madison for their annual user group meeting where they go through the roadmap, here's what's next. They have all their advisory council meetings there 6 months later, basically. So all these huge healthcare systems and decision makers come to Madison, and that's a great time to say, hey, you're in town, let's grab a cup of coffee, let's grab lunch, let's go out for drinks or something. So it was way easier than flying out to California for a 1 hour meeting, and you just burned a lot of money and two days of time.
But okay, you're off 2008. You've got this. You're in Madison. So you're seeing Epic grow, and you decide to do this. What was Nordic in its first incarnation? What was the? How would you describe the first version of Nordic? And did it change by the time it sold, or was it really just pretty much scaling the first version of it?
So early on, we basically had to decide how we were going to pay the consultants. And the market was basically just paying people, whatever they were making plus 20% as a salary, and then some kind of billing bonus. And we had to really convince people that, hey, you could make way more. You're paid hourly. And the reason it's good for you and good for us is that, all of a sudden, if you're hourly, you ended up entering your time on time. I didn't have to hunt you down. And I say, can you really get your hours in? Because if you don't, I can't send out a bill, which means I won't get paid, which means I can't pay you, but I can't really tell you all that stuff. So it really aligned incentives, and the trick was convincing the first few people to do that. And once
but
they
what was
did,
the, how would you just, if I'm meeting you and you've started Nordic, and I run a health system, right? how would you, and that would be pretty good coincidence, how would you describe Nordic? How would you describe its value proposition?
So the way I would describe it is that there was such huge demand for anybody that knew Epic, and they had to be certified. And they basically, the customers would say, Epic can help me, but the problem is they can only supply people 1 or 2 days a week. I need someone here full-time that has done this 2 or 3 times before at a similar size healthcare organization. So I'd say we have people that have 10 years experience or more. They're certified in 4 or 5 of these applications, not just one. Most of them used to work at Epic, so customers would say, okay, I kind of know what that's like. Typically at Epic, they're really, really like right out of college, so the customers are like, these are kids. But they know that if they have 10 years experience, they're okay, now they're 10 years later. And the way I had to price it originally, I had to price it about 20% less per hour than everybody else, just to kind of get in front of them. So
And who else was in the Epic?
There was hundreds and hundreds of other consulting companies out there already.
On Epic?
Absolutely,
Okay.
yeah. And I also had to convince Epic to give us a consulting agreement. And
Was that difficult?
Thankfully, it happened very quickly. Thankfully, I knew some people that. One of my customers from my previous businesses was the CIO of a local Madison hospital, and he was good friends with Judy. And that helped say, hey, Mark's a good guy. He's going to do this. He'll play by all the rules. And as you know, customers need better consultants out there. So that.
And there were hundreds of these out there.
Oh, yeah.
And how did so you get the agreement and you're able to do it. And did you have a sense of the market? What was the market for Epic like? And how much share did Epic have? Because over that period of time, Epic's growing, and then you were able to grow not only to be the biggest consultant, but then you have this larger and larger market every year.
So back in 2010, all I knew is that the HITECH Act was kicking in, so hospitals were getting tons of government money to implement a system like Epic. Epic seemed to have good momentum and good market share. And then you'd look out there on the boards, and people were just screaming for talent. And typically, they'd want to hire them as employees because that's a lot cheaper than paying consultants to do it. But I also knew that Judy controlled all the demand at Epic, and she couldn't keep enough people certified in the market. So it was similar to my first company, when all of a sudden everybody wanted Microsoft, and there were not enough Microsoft certified engineers. So I figured there would be a similar thing happening in the Epic world, where there wouldn't be enough people. And with Epic, you can't go to a tech school and get certified in Epic. You have to either work for Epic or work for a health system and then go get certified. And then all these positions that come up, they say, hey, you need to be certified. So
you can't get certified at a consulting firm.
No.
You got to be at a customer or,
Yeah, so we would have to hire people that were already certified, basically, which in some ways made it easier because those people would have a lot of experience. But at the time, nobody knew who we were, so I had to convince them that, hey, we're in Madison, we have access to great people, we can find people for you, tell me what you're looking for. And because the market was so desperate, they'd reach out everywhere. And thankfully, early on, it's, make sure you make really good hires early on. I'd make sure, the people we were hiring and representing our company were of the quality I wanted people to represent our brand and everything else. So that, in the first company, I would okay, we'll just hire people.
Sure.
And they should be able to do it. The second one, we thought a lot more about the types of people to hire. And that went a long way, because all of a sudden they'd say, wow, this person is awesome. They know how to run meetings, they show up, they take note, they can really help us get a lot of stuff done quickly, and they're way better than all the other consultants out there.
And now, if you're in the HealthX portfolio, right, and you're asking Mark for advice on how to interview and how to hire the first 10 people, what would you advise and what would you recommend to entrepreneurs? What interview questions, what do you look for, especially early on?
So early on, we're funding companies now, and what I look for is, that sales and marketing kind of super persuasive person, very charismatic, very outgoing, very passionate, that can tell the story, that eventually can, draw in customers, draw in investors, draw in
For salespeople, Mark, or for everybody?
for just the core team.
Just it doesn't matter.
The core team, you really, really need someone
Good
like
distinction,
that.
yeah.
You really need someone like that. And they have to have enough upside where like, hey, this is my time, this is my chance. And then with that person, though, people like me, you need a really good business person that can rein that person in from time to time when they're like, squirrel. Basically. Because there's lots of things. You think anything's possible, but you really have to stay focused. Even at Nordic, we just stayed focused. There were a lot of times when we're like, oh, we should do this, or we should, we could do it in Europe too, or we could do this, and it just didn't make sense for the business. We just really had to stay focused on what we're doing and be better than anybody else in the world at, and be a great value prop. And over time, customers are willing to pay more for that brand because they feel like you can get way more done faster. With services, it's very subjective because it's not like a widget where you can say, hey, I can buy it cheaper on Amazon or Walmart or something like that. Services, it's the hourly rates, and they're like, okay, why am I paying this much for this certified person versus this much? And as you know, some people are just way better at their job than others, basically.
And so, okay, so that's on hiring a little bit.
Yeah.
The other interesting part of Mark's story with Nordic is he didn't take any funding, and that's talked about, and it's a topic of conversation, I'm sure, through the halls of Matter, in 1871, always for entrepreneurs, no matter where you are. Talk about that decision as an entrepreneur. Did you think about taking funding? Did you know this time around I'm not taking funding? And ultimately, how did you fund the growth? And describe maybe the factoring for people who don't know what it is, and how did you ultimately build brick by brick up?
Yeah, so in 2010, we officially launched Nordic. And at that time, I literally was starting from scratch. I had basically lost everything in my last company. And it was very humbling, very humiliating. I didn't have anything. I borrowed money from my parents who couldn't afford to lend me money, but they believed in me.
I think it's one of the greatest stories.
And I was like, oh boy, this is terrible. I need to find a way to prove to people I actually know what I'm doing. And I think there's got to be a way to do this without borrowing money from family again. First of all, they weren't going to lend me any more money. So that wasn't even on the table. Bankers weren't going to lend me any more money, so that wasn't on the table. And but thankfully there was, Madison had a Madison Development Corp, a $50,000 loan that we qualified for because at the time in 2008, everyone was looking for anybody to start a new company, even if they would lose basically $50,000. But they wanted an entrepreneur who had started companies before, and it didn't matter what my credit score was.
That made a difference for you.
It was everything.
I mean, you hear about programs like that all the time.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
What a cool thing to
So
come
their
up
whole
with.
thing was like, hey, if you can create 2 jobs in the next 5 years, we'd be thrilled, basically. And it's 1,000 jobs today, averaging 1,000 a year. So it changed everything. It allowed us enough to at least pay ourselves a little bit and hire the first consultant. And then the way factoring works is so in our model, we'd have a consultant go to a customer, and they do billable work, and they typically work 2 40-hour work weeks. So we'd charge the customer for 80 hours, roughly $150 an hour, and it's $12,000 bill. So we send them the bill. Typically, they'll pay in 45 days. Some might be 60 days, 90 days. But in the meantime, you have to pay that employee, 2 weeks later, a week later. So what we do, as soon as we created the invoice, we worked with a factoring company that allowed us to sell that invoice to the factoring company. It's almost like a payday loan, where they would verify that it's legit. And the way we did that, we'd have like a accounting@nordic.com, and we'd send it to the customer and say, hey, you need to reply and say, yes, we received it, and we submitted it for payment. That way, the factoring company would be notified, so we could keep it behind the scenes. And then as soon as they verified it, the factoring company would wire us 80% of the invoice immediately the next day. And they would hold back 20% in case the customer didn't pay. And then once the customer actually paid, they'd pay at Nordic at a P.O. box that the factoring company would get the check. Once the check cleared, they would send us the 20% that they held back. but then they would charge us like a per day interest.
Right.
It ended up being about 18% interest a year. But for me, that's how I backed into our model. We could pay people roughly 2/3 of what we charged, and it forced us to try to live within 14%.
It's a very innovative way to do it, right? Because when you look at a startup and you've got to fund it, there's different sources of burn.
Oh, yeah.
And it sounds like with your company, Mark, the company was making money, but it had a working capital related burn. The more you grow, the more working capital you need. You're able to solve for that. And was that scary at times? You know, because all of a sudden there isn't a base of capital to work from. You're kind of growing and you're managing the working capital, but you don't have much tolerance for being able to lose any money. And so, you know, talk about that, because that's you know, being a founder, entrepreneur, CEO of a company like that, you know, we all learn how to manage through scarce resources, but you really all the way through learned very well how to grow while having scarce capital. And talk about the culture and the financial discipline. And you know, if you've got 5 people and they all want to hire someone, how do you decide who gets to hire?
So that was a conversation early on where I had, you know, I literally did payroll, I did taxes, I set up insurance, I did HR. I'm like, I'm going to have to do everything this time. There is nobody else. And I'm smart enough, I can figure this out. I'll do it. And as we grew, it kind of came down to, you know, we'd have to place 7 net new consultants before we could hire another internal person. And everybody like, oh, we really need someone to do this, you know, another salesperson, another engineer, another internal IT or whatever, marketing or something. And I'd say, well, we can't afford it. You know, if you want to pay it out of your own pocket, great. But just out of necessity, I'd say, hey, if we can all place 7 more consultants, then we can talk about what the next best hire should be for the company that allow us to kind of...
There's almost a reward, so everyone probably really wanted to place new consultants.
No, it was, you know, you always talk about, you know, your key metrics that you want to measure. For us, it was net new consultants, because the math just worked. All of a sudden, we could easily afford it, and we'd, you know, publish it outside my office, and we'd like, everyone would be banging the gong and working, you know, working whoever they could to try to find a way to place another consultant or bring another consultant into the network.
Was that the one metric that everybody in the company followed, net new consultants?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and it was always a, you know, badge of honor where, you know, all of a sudden it was like 20 net new and 25. I mean, it was awesome. It was.
And then how many consultants did you get up to?
So when I left at the end of 14, we were at about 500 consultants, and today it's probably 800 or more.
In a competitive market, you've got different consulting firms bidding on business. They can obviously hire them internally. How did you go and compete? You know, what were the advantages? Once, you know, tell me about, you know, how you acquired customers and kept customers, because oftentimes, you know, companies feel like they have something innovative they can bring to the table, but acquiring customers is where, you know, they always seem to struggle with traction. What do you offer as advice to entrepreneurs now from your experiences growing Nordic and healthcare?
So I'm not 100% sure. At the time when I did it, I didn't know anything about healthcare. I didn't really know anything about Epic, other than it was a big software company in my backyard. And most people would be shocked today. I still have never seen an Epic screen of software.
Really?
Ever. Yep. I don't want to, honestly. In my mind, it's perfect. It's great. It works. I explain it to people every day. Like, awesome. But it's just one of those things where, you know, Judy controls a lot of that, and I never got certified and anything else. But I needed to understand the high level of what it could do and how the needs were being met and what the workflow and how it solved problems. I didn't necessarily need to know what it looked like as far as everything else. I know programming, and I know it very well, so I'm assuming it's fairly logical. And there's a reason why a lot of people are using it today versus everything else out there.
Why? So talk about that. You know, when you started at Nordic 2010, how big was Epic, and then how big was it in 14? And you know, in general, what do you think has made Epic successful? You work directly with systems. You've seen Epic. What makes Epic win against everything else?
So I think the major thing is that when they designed it, you know, they had, you know, the patient at the center, but they've designed all the software to work together. They didn't buy other companies, Frankenstein, bolt them together. A lot of the bigger companies, might have, an ambulatory piece or radiology piece or something else, a lab piece. And the customers would get frustrated, like, wait a minute, you're all Cerner or something, but why do I have to log in 3 different times? This makes no sense to me. Why does this look a little different than this
The
one?
experience just felt
the
disjointed.
the interface and everything else. And most physicians, today, they're probably regretting some of this, but would say it's way better than anything else out there. And it's easy to use, and it's kind of intuitive from that sense, and the workflow just makes a lot of sense. So just because of Epic and the way that Judy and Carl and the whole team over there has run everything, I think that gave them a huge advantage.
And talk about the culture at Nordic and the culture at Nordic about Epic. Because, many companies, early stages, have maybe one big customer, right? But even as you scaled, you had lots of customers, but you were an Epic-centric company. And so, talk about your own culture and then the relationship of that culture to Epic as you scaled and the ups and downs of that.
So our culture was mostly former Epic people. So they all came from there. Most of them, it was their first job out of college. And they understood, the way Epic thinks, as well as the way Epic customers work with Epic and everything else. So I think that gave us a huge advantage just from the sense. And typically all those people are very, very similar. I describe most of them as, phenomenal number 2s in companies. They're not crazy enough to be number 1s in companies to take these risks and mortgage the future and do everything else, but they're really, really good at being organized and getting things done and being very, very focused. So that was mostly our culture. And then thankfully being, in Madison, it's a small town. It's,
Sure.
There's 10,000 people today at Epic, almost 10,000. And, all the people we would hire would typically either have a sibling or a friend or a relative that works there. And the more people would hear about Nordic and how, we treated people. I always treated everyone like, hey, I would not be here today if it wasn't for you. So what can I do for you? I will go to bat for you. I will try to make your next gig better than your last one, whether it's, better location, better rate, better role, the team that you're working with. All those things we'd take into consideration. And I think most people found that refreshing, especially coming from where they came from, wink, wink, nod, nod, and they basically tell everybody else to say, hey, it is a little different. And I would say do it as long as you can do it, and it might lead to your next thing. Because I don't think many people can be a consultant forever. It's a lot to ask of someone to be on the road. Typically, they'd be on the road, 3 out of 4 weeks a month. And they'd be living out of a suitcase in a hotel. And at first, it might be fun. You get lots of frequent flyer miles and free meals and hotel points. But after a while, you're like, the pay's pretty good, but I don't know if I can do this forever. Some people are still doing it quite a long time. So.
Sure, yeah. And then you talk about, Mark, a little bit, being in Madison. We have another great entrepreneur from Madison, Jonathan Barron, we see here, maybe some others. I've been up there for HealthVenture and for other stuff. You've made investments there, and you've got a whole health IT ecosystem going. And I want you to comment about it from 2 perspectives. So 10,000 employees is a lot anywhere, but it's especially a high number in Madison. And so how do you think that culture and ecosystem around Epic would work if it was in San Francisco or in Chicago or some other big city? Do you think that they've been different in part because they're maybe a bigger fish in a smaller pond relative to where they would be otherwise? And then 2, how has that affected the health IT ecosystem, and what's the future of that ecosystem and of Madison?
So I think it would be a way different company if it wasn't in Madison. So part of it is just the quality of life, the cost of living is way, way cheaper in Madison, especially even in Chicago, but dramatically so, like in Silicon Valley. And everybody works in the same location, which I think is great because you can get a lot more done when you're face-to-face. So all the teams work together, and Judy has them all live there for a reason. They have team meetings, very regularly and everything else. So I think it's huge for the company for her to make that investment and make that investment in all the people and all the buildings and everything else that she does to facilitate a great working environment. For Madison, it's changed everything. I mean, 10,000 jobs that are great paying jobs in an industry that needs a lot of help for a long time to find ways to make it more efficient and learn from each other. So it's put Madison on the map. I mean, I'm incredibly impressed as an entrepreneur what Judy and Carl and the whole team has done for healthcare industry. On one hand, it's just incredible to grow a company like that without taking investors, without taking on debt, and creating such large market share and everything else. And because of that, they have probably 10-15% turnover a year. That's 1,500 people that some of them come to Madison, and then some of them have really good ideas. Some of them want to stay because they're like, hey, Madison isn't bad, and they met someone else or something like that. And then they have really good relationships. I mean, they've made strong relationships with very influential health systems around the country, which is another reason why Nordic did so well. We'd hire people, but they're like, oh yeah, I know the CIO of Stanford, I know the CIO of Cleveland Clinic, and all of a sudden, all I needed was an introduction, and I'd tell our story, and that led to a new customer. So it was a great way to get new customers.
Sure.
And I don't know if that works for any of you out there, but if you can find a former Epic person that worked for Epic for 5 years or something, they probably know 2 or 3 health systems very, very well. And if those are health systems that really could use what you're selling, might be a way to get a really good referenceable customer.
That's right.
So,
look, you had a partnership with Epic, and even though you haven't seen an Epic page, you had a pretty good understanding of the records, industry. And so, what's the future there? Do you think Epic, is going to be the main player forever? Do you see a number 2 or 3 or 4 emerging? How do you think that industry looks, 5 or 10 years from now? How does it evolve? How does it change? How does share move?
So I'm very, very optimistic about Epic. I think a lot of people that know this space, they wonder, how Epic rose to the top, and they have questions about their technology, if they know anything about technology, which I do, what it's built on, and all those other things. Despite all that, I do know how much money people have spent putting in Epic, and I believe it was a once-in-a-lifetime thing where the government incented organizations enough, and people made their bets, and they spent a lot of money on putting Epic in. A lot with Nordic, thankfully, and a lot with many others out there. And because of that, the cost of switching to anything else is very prohibitive to do, even if it was free software. The cost is in retraining your staff. The cost is in redoing all the workflows and building the whole systems. It's similar to any other software that's out there, SAP or Microsoft. It's just so hard to switch once you get market share and established. That being said, I've been around long enough now to see companies that are closed and say, hey, if everybody just uses my stuff, life will be great. And eventually, if they don't open it up, customers tend to say, hey, this is not working for me. I need something where I can, take that piece and make it better. I know you think you could solve all of our problems in a timely fashion. I'm hopeful that Epic will continue to do that. They do a lot today. They probably don't get as much recognition for it as they should. So there's the open.epic.com. They're hopefully going to do some more things. It's a balancing act between privacy and security and protecting people's everything else. So it's not as simple as just opening it up like Microsoft did or Linux. It might be more like Apple with the App Store and saying, okay, in our world we can control everything. We control the operating system, the hardware, this and that. And if you want to put things on top of it, we have rules and everything else. It just takes time to kind of work through all that. So I'm hopeful that'll be the direction that they continue to go in. I think a lot of us would like it to happen yesterday because we're entrepreneurs, but
we'll ask Mark more about Epic a little bit later in the Q&A. I hear he has a funny Judy story, so we're going to hold him to that. But you know, Mark, talk about selling the company. You know, how did you think about that? Was it something that you wanted to do? Was it an offer that showed up that surprised you? And was that tough for you to make a decision on? What did it feel like to not own Nordic and ultimately run Nordic?
So in 2010, we started Nordic in April, and by the end of the year, we did 1.3 million in revenue, which I was amazed, you know. And then, you know, the next year, all of a sudden, we did 13 million, and then the following year, we did 40 million. And at that point, you know, we're still, you know, very thin margins, basically, paying consultants a lot. But we got approached by a group of VCs that had noticed that we got ranked #1 in class for Epic Consulting. First time that report came out. And they said, hey, we know you don't need money, but would you be interested in doing a recap? And I was like, well, what does that mean? You know, and they said, well, we'd love to buy half the company, and if we could do that, you know, we think we'd be willing to pay this. We think you're worth X. And I was like, wow, I had no idea, and talked, you know, amongst everybody, and like, well, if it was 2X, then maybe, basically. And a few months later, all of a sudden it was 2X, and I was like, that's a lot of money for me, given my ups and downs in life and everything else. So we ended up working out a deal, and it was a great deal. It was the first time I ever worked with VCs, and thankfully it was a phenomenal group of VCs. It was led by SV Life Sciences in Boston, and HealthX Ventures came in with it, and out of Boston, and HEP out of New York, Health Enterprise Partners, and then Kaiser Ventures, which Kaiser's Epic's biggest customer, so I always thought it would be good to have Kaiser as a part owner, and just in case I said something that was taken the wrong way by Epic.
Sure.
You know, get one of our owners to smooth it over, basically.
Did that help?
Yeah. So if you can do that, I would recommend that as well. So.
And then, now, how did that look? You know, next day, right? You wake up.
Yep.
What was it like? Was it different running the company, having new ownership, new business partners? And then how long did you stay at Nordic and continue to run the company that way?
So that was in the fall of 2012, and it wasn't different. I mean, it was different in the sense that I had people I could go to that I trusted that could give me advice to help us keep going and not screw it up, you know, basically. They really helped in all the areas they said they would. They helped with business advice. They helped with figuring out how to get a real CFO into the company to make sure, you know, we could plan for the future and forecast better and do all the things we needed to do to bump up the EBITDA by a point or two every year and make it a better investment for everybody, and still preserve the culture, basically. And then great industry insight. You know, one of them has been on the board of advisory board companies forever, so they could all spoon feed me tons of, you know, industry information that I needed to know when I'm out there talking to CIOs and CMIOs. And then just great connections. So HEP, a lot of their investors are large health systems, and I would go to the annual meeting and I'd give the update, and all of a sudden they'd introduce me to these CFOs of, you know, these huge health systems, and they're like, oh yeah, we need Epic consultants, I'll connect you with so-and-so. And just like that, you know, you have more and more customers, basically. So that, and, you know, and then Kaiser was great. We didn't have Kaiser as a customer, and as you know, Kaiser would be great to, you know, have as a customer, and thankfully, eventually, we got them as a customer. So all those things, they kind of really delivered on everything, and then we continued to grow for a couple more years to the point where, you know, I knew as part of the deal, eventually we're probably going to sell to somebody. And as we're getting to that point, you know, I'm sitting there going, okay, if we sell, I don't really want to work for, you know, an Accenture or Deloitte. Nothing against them. It's just I would be a horrible employee. And And they'd be like, how do we fire this guy without looking like jerks? And I'm like, how do I make it look like I didn't get fired? And then I'd have, so I ended up talking to the board and said, okay, what if we did this? What if I moved into the chairman of the board role? We turn over the day-to-day to my team. We all know they're doing all the work now anyways. And I want to go start a venture fund, basically. And we'll hire someone, we'll do a process and see what's out there and see if it makes sense to sell the company. And if it does, great. But then, then my non-compete is limited to just, can't really do Epic Consulting for a long time, but I could still work in healthcare, and I could still continue to talk to all the people I met along the way, all the CIOs and everything else. So it was wonderful that they allowed me to do that. And eventually, they didn't end up selling Nordic, which I think is great, because now, it's continuing to grow. They ended up bringing in another investor, which ended up, allowing me to completely exit, and now just focus 100% on HealthX and finding other great companies to invest in at the seed early stage, where most VCs won't. I view it as just a way to kind of give back, and I've learned a lot, and there's a lot of things I think I could share along the way, and it's just been a blast to work with other entrepreneurs that have really good ideas and great teams and just need a little capital to kind of build that safety net to prove out their business, reduce them, and help them navigate how to work with Epic and Epic customers.
You've been building businesses for a while. Now you're on the other side of the table and you're investing. How did that feel? Did it feel very natural to you? How did it feel to wake up and go be a VC instead of going to Nordic? And what surprised you about making that transition? And how has it been? And also tell us a little bit more about HealthX. What do you guys look for? And what's been one investment you've made so far that you're excited about?
Sure. So it wasn't natural because I'd never done it before. So thankfully there were a lot of other people in Madison, Jonathan being one of them, who started a group of other people, and he had raised money and at the seed early stage, and I started doing some angel investing once I took some chips off the table in 2012, and that gave me some visibility to how it works and how I could help, not just financially, but from advice and connections and introductions, and started thinking, wow, this could be like the thing I do. Instead of just live happily ever after, I could actually help people figure out how to navigate this crazy world of startup, going from nothing to something, which is incredibly fun if you can do it, if you can get to the other side. Right. And so anyway, so that's where it got to the point where I'm like, okay, if I could be a VC,
Did you just do it on your own for a while? Did you raise a fund right away? Or?
So I started raising a fund. So originally I was like, okay, maybe I could raise a $5 million fund. I'll put $1 million of my own in, but I don't have $20 million that my wife will let me bet on, basically. So thankfully, there were enough other people, high net worth people in the area, mostly in Wisconsin, that kind of knew Epic's story, knew Madison's story, knew all the challenges of healthcare. And then I knew I needed a great team to do it, just like at Nordic. There's no way I could have done it without a great team. And I found some really good people that could help give me advice on what to look for an investment and how to structure a deal that makes sense for the entrepreneurs, as well as maybe previous investors and future investors, and trying to find that balance. I viewed it at Nordic where I was an agent for the consultants. I was there for them, going to bat for them, doing whatever I can to make them successful. And now I feel like if I can do that on the VC world, hopefully we'll create a reputation as being a great VC firm that can not only, work with great people and be super responsive and help them and help them get to a Series A and a Series B and an exit someday. That would be great. I'll do whatever I can to make every company we invest in become successful. I don't want anybody to fail and everybody laughs like, 8 out of 10 fail. That's not an option. You have to find a way. What can we do? Let me know before it's too late type thing.
Mark, when you meet entrepreneurs, whether it's here or elsewhere, Now, what do you look for? What are the questions running through your head as a seed stage investor
Sure.
in the first 30 minutes, 40 minutes of talking to an entrepreneur?
So obviously the business idea has to be, it has to make sense. It has to be a big enough idea, big enough market out there where you hear it and you go, what? That's actually a pretty good idea. There's not really anybody out there doing it. Or the people that are just gouging people, and customers are very, very not happy with them. And it's a good new way of doing something, basically. And then the team, obviously the team has to be great. You know, we talked about the different roles. And in this case, you need a really good technology person, too. It'd be nice if they were part of the core team versus outsourced, or at least like a CTO. That would be ideal. Because anything we're doing is investing in digital health solutions for the health, you know, for software for the healthcare industry, basically. It's not life science, not biotech, not necessarily devices. It's very, very, very focused on software just because you can pivot quickly and it doesn't cost a fortune. You don't have to figure out all the supply chain stuff. You don't need all the regulatory approvals.
Sure.
And it's our connections are looking for solutions like that. So it's something we can provide value to. So we look for, you know, not just a great team and a great business model. You know, we have to look at how they're going to charge for it, how they're going to make money, what the sales cycle is like. Obviously, can we provide value there? What's the competition look like?
Sure.
But they keep, you know, it keeps coming down to the people and the team. And if the team is, you know, willing to, you know, work for a little less than they could make somewhere else in exchange for upside, and they're willing to kind of watch their burn rate and be smart about it, that's great. It's different for me because I've never had investors, and I always like, okay, that's not even an option, so we got to find a way to make money every step of the way. With software, it's harder to do because you have to invest in the future. And but there is kind of a formula now. The more I've been doing this, to say, okay, if you can show enough momentum, then you can get the downstream VCs to say, because we kind of know what they're looking for, and we have to help those companies be positioned so they're very attractive to a number of bigger VCs downstream.
Right, that's right. Terrific, Mark. Well, you know, we're going to move into audience Q&A, so if you have any questions, go to social QA or vote your favorite question. But I'm going to end, Mark, with, you know, give us your favorite maybe Judy story and what it was like to work with Epic, work with Judy, work with Carl all those years and build a business around Epic.
So I have lots of Judy stories. I probably can't share a lot of them on video. One of them that is good that some of you may have heard before is if you've ever been out to their corporate headquarters, it's an amazing place. It's part Disney, part Google. Everybody has, you know, an office with a door that closes basically, and their conference rooms have all these themes. There's, you know, the Wizard and Harry Potter theme and the Storybook and all these, you know, different ones out there. So if you ever get a chance, if you're in, happen to be in Verona, they do offer free public walking tours where you can go up there. They're during special times, and you can go out there and you can see their 14,000 seat auditorium that's all below ground, and it's just amazing. Their learning center and where they train everybody. So if you ever can do it, I would highly recommend doing it. But one of the stories was when she was developing, they basically, you know, a bunch of different campuses, and at the center is their learning center. So their campuses might be, you know, 5 to 8 buildings. They're all connected, and it might be focused around, you know, one of their products or 2 or 3 or 4 of their products, basically. When she was buying bricks for one of her new campuses, she ordered tons and tons of bricks, and she got them all in, and she was like, I really don't like this color. So she ended up donating them all to the Verona public school system and fire station, and ordered all new bricks after that, basically. But she literally picks out like everything, all the art in all the buildings, all the conference rooms, every little detail.
What do you think makes her tick? Like at this point, what is she about? What is she driving to?
I mean, For her, it's definitely not about the money. I mean, she could easily, do whatever she wants to do the rest of her life. It is about making healthcare better, and it is about, making it better. Does that mean making healthcare more efficient? Getting better outcomes, learning from each other, using technology to do that, and it drives her every minute of every day. And she's, very, very particular about her way of doing it. And obviously, it's working very well for her. I think she'll probably keep doing it till the end.
This is somewhat related, but the top audience question is, what's the future of EHR design? There's a lot of user experience and interoperability complaints, but maybe what's the incentive to change it? Is there any incentive to change it? Do you see it getting better?
Specifically, why don't you repeat that again? Sorry.
No problem, Mark. And you can take it any direction you want, but the question is, what is the future of EHR design? Lots of user experience and interoperability complaints, but any incentive to change it?
I think the pressure is coming from the health systems, and
you think it's the government? Do you think it's health? What do you think will be the catalyst?
I think it'll be more driven by
Customers,
the customers. And the customers will say, hey, I think they're at a point where they're saying, hey, I know the EHR vendor, I know I paid for this license and I get everything, and I know you have the best intentions to do this, this, and this, but I met this other company that's all they do, and they do it better than anybody else, and they're awesome, and I know you have like a light version or a watered down version of what this company can do. I need you to kind of work with this other company, because if we had that solution, and that solution is very, very important to us as a healthcare organization, and Epic and some of the other EHR vendors, some of the other ones are better than others, are starting to realize that say, you know what, this still drives our mission, which is to make healthcare better. And yes, we would love to, do everything for everybody, but there might be a solution here where we can kind of all play nice together.
Now, if you're a startup and you're watching this and you're thinking, what do I need to do as a startup to make sure that we can plug and play with an EHR? What would your advice be? What can the earliest stage companies do to make sure that they can play nicely with an Epic or with EHRs?
So one of the companies I did tell about, I forgot to mention, one of our best companies is Redox. I don't know how many people know Redox, but it was our first investment at HealthX. I personally invested early on too, just because I knew the team and I knew what they were doing was not easy. So a lot of them are former Epic kind of interoperability people. And they know how to get stuff in and out of an EHR. And there's other competitors, of course, out there that do stuff similar. But companies like that are a very, very easy way to work with them if you need to kind of get data in and out of an Epic system or out of Cerner or Allscripts or any of the other ones out there.
Terrific. How about, what was the toughest fire you've ever had, and how did that go?
Fire?
That's the question, the toughest fire. I would say I think they don't mean it literally, but you never know.
At Nordic or at?
Yeah, Nordic.
So at Nordic, there was a point in time where Epic had thought we had hired an employee, not necessarily before their non-compete. It was actually hired an employee of a health system, of a customer that we weren't even doing business with at the time, and we didn't get the proper approvals. And because of that, they were, questioning whether we should keep our consulting agreement and everything else like that. So it really, wow, this is very, very scary, because we really felt like we didn't do anything wrong. That specific employee was like a nurse, and she wanted to work for us, and she was outgoing. She got permission from the CEO of this huge health system. And, it opened my eyes to basically say, wow, this doesn't seem fair, but it is what it is. And if I don't do something about it quick, it could change everything. So thankfully, I had a good relationship with Judy and Carl and talked to them about it, and their facts were, fortunately incorrect. We'd actually done everything, and we didn't even know we weren't supposed to hire from people that weren't our customers and everything else. So that was kind of a scary time where it actually was at a point where, like, wow, we might not be able to do Epic Consulting anymore. They're like, hey, you can do anything you want, you just can't do Epic Consulting. That really wasn't going to work well for our business model. So.
Well, what do you see as the biggest, challenges in healthcare that can be addressed by startups here at Matter?
There's so many challenges with healthcare. It's such a complicated industry just because it's so expensive. We're 20 cents of every dollar almost is spent in America on healthcare, and it's almost twice as much as every first world country. And everybody kind of blames everyone else, basically. The health systems might blame, physicians, and physicians might blame patients, and everyone's like, hey, it's basically all of our problem here. So there's a lot of creative solutions out there to say, how can we make the whole system more efficient? So it's such a big market, and technology can be used. If we can look at how technology is used in other industries and bring some of those ideas in. Some of the bigger health systems are doing that, like Providence and some of the others. And I think they'll bring those ideas to the table. And any of you out there, you need someone who understands healthcare, but sometimes it's refreshing for people, even like me, I didn't know anything about healthcare, to come in and say, hey, we might be able to create a business model here that makes sense for everybody going forward. So I think we all just have to learn from each other faster.
Now, another question here is, when growing your firm, how did you scale some of the intangibles, things like culture, work ethic, and hunger that you created it with? How did you make sure that when you got to 500 or more, you kept a lot of that?
So for us, we ended up, you end up working with marketing companies, and you go through all this stuff to say if you were a person as a company, what would you be, and all these things. And eventually we jotted down kind of what our beliefs were, and mission and vision and all those things, and hammered it home to kind of be reflective and say, what has got us to where we're at. So for us, it was always, I called it the tree, basically, because I could remember it was an acronym. So the T was for transparency, so super transparent. R was for responsiveness. I just knew that early on, I just told all of our customers, like, listen, you can reach me 24 hours a day, and you have to jump. When a customer is finally ready and they want something, you have to get back to them immediately, because otherwise they'll just move on to something else, and they'll lose your email because it gets buried in their inbox, and you'll lose another week or two. So responsiveness was super key. Like, hey, I'm on it. When can we do this? And we'll get back to you right away. And then easy to work with.
You are on it all the time. I struggle with that, but you are really always quick.
It's hard.
Yeah.
It's very hard. You can talk to some of these people. I'm not always on as much as I should be. So it's a little too much. Thankfully, as you grow, you add people, and they can help you.
And then how about the rest of them? That was.
So it was, for us, for me, it was those four. We've added other ones as we've gone bigger to kind of talk about it. But it was, if you could just be super transparent, across the board from all your employees and share everything with them. We always shared financials. We shared everything. It is what it is, basically. Responsiveness, easy to work with, and
okay. Well, good. Maybe we'll call it here, unless you guys suddenly furious about some more questions. But this is a good long topic, Mark. It was no secret who you supported during this last presidential election, and cared about that.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you now see, President Trump coming in and the comments about the Affordable Care Act, what's going through your head? How do you think this new administration and the policy shift that you're seeing from President Obama to this administration will affect healthcare? What does it mean for people in the room? What does it mean for health IT?
So, I mean, I'm still hopeful, but I'm always a very optimistic person, that they won't just, repeal it and kick the can down the road. I'm hopeful they'll just make it better. It's like anything. It's, when you start a business, you think it should work like this, but you have to iterate quickly and keep improving upon it. And, as we all know, it's not perfect. There's a lot of great things about the Affordable Care Act, but there's a lot of things that probably need to be revisited and made better. And I'm hopeful that the people around him will convince him of that, because we can't just, stop, 20 million people from having health care, and, all the businesses, the healthcare systems have kind of built that into their model and everything else like that. So I'm hopeful that his business mind will kick in and won't just do it because he was saying it on the campaign trail. But I think the word is that hopefully they'll say, okay, we'll tweak it, basically.
If you were, from first principles, just, advising any policymaker, any legislator on healthcare, what would you push on? Where do you think the government at any level can help improve healthcare and the ecosystem and help move things forward?
Well, so I think, the government, since, the government pays basically half of all the health care bills in America, mostly for Medicare and Medicaid, so half of all the revenue comes from the government, they should be a little more forceful to say, hey, systems need to be more open and interoperable and things like that. They should, be able to force the industry to get their act together and work together and do some of the things that the other industries have done for decades, basically. It's so far back when it comes to technology. When I first came in, I was like, it's like 1980 all over again. So it's crazy that it's still so far behind all the other industries out there. And I think, and maybe that would be one of the advantages of a Trump administration, where they'll just say, wow, okay, I've got a lot of leverage here. I'm going to force them to do this, this,
Sure.
this, and this. And maybe that'll be for the better. Who knows?
Well, you mentioned international a little bit. At one point, you were thinking about should Nordic go international. As you zoom out a little bit, we look not just at the U.S. but at the world. What is this market like broadly? What does it look like in Europe? What does it look like in Asia and other areas around their medical record systems, their ecosystems? How are we different? How are we similar? Where are we trending more like them, and vice versa?
So, I mean, we're still way ahead of the rest of the world. The rest of the world does not have, the luxury that we have from a cost perspective. They have to, do things very, very frugally, which sometimes means they can't invest in drugs, or they can't invest in technology or other things. So we are way, way further ahead. And I'm hopeful it'll get to the point where we're more proactive with healthcare instead of reactive, where we can actually, based on your DNA and based on other people like you, we can kind of predict what might happen. I do think America will lead the charge there, and I do think there's a lot of other countries waiting for us to figure it out.
Do you think that American medical record software providers are having success internationally as well?
Some of them are, but the difference is those countries can't afford to pay what they're used to charging here. So they have to look at it and say, does this make good business sense to do this, or can they find a way to lower their cost? It was even with us. We couldn't charge what we had to charge because the people that we were hiring were expecting to get paid a certain amount. And then if you say, okay, now you have to do it over there, you're going to make way less. And we can't reimburse you for expenses. And, it's just harder to find someone. Some people are like, that's fine, because I would love to live in Europe for a while. I'd love to live in Australia for a while, even if I am making, half as much as I could here.
Well, one day we're going to have Judy in that chair, we hope.
I would love that.
And we want
great.
Mark to have a chair right here, and we're going to ask her for a good Mark Bakken story.
Oh, jeez.
Thank you again, Mark.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.